London, England, April 19, 1943. The cryptography division at Bletchley Park was experiencing another sleepless night as analysts pored over intercepted communications, their eyes strained under dim lighting, fingers cramping from endless notation. In a cramped office 3 floors below ground level, 17-year-old Margaret Ainsworth sat hunched over a wooden desk, cluttered with photographs, a simple pocket mirror positioned at a peculiar angle against a desk lamp. Her colleagues believed she was wasting time on an absurd theory, a schoolgirl's fantasy that would lead nowhere. They had no idea that within 72 hours, her crazy mirror trick would dismantle one of the most protected intelligence networks operating on British soil, a revelation so stunning it would force Allied Command to completely restructure their counterintelligence protocols. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Margaret discovered that spring evening would transform the entire landscape of wartime intelligence operations, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated threats could be exposed by the simplest tools, wielded by the most unexpected hands. Margaret had arrived at Bletchley Park 6 months earlier, recruited directly from Cambridge Girls' Grammar School, where her mathematics teacher had noticed something exceptional about the way she approached geometry problems. While other students calculated angles and measurements through standard formulas, Margaret visualized spaces in 3 dimensions, could mentally rotate objects and see hidden patterns that remained invisible to others. This spatial intelligence, as Professor Edmund Hartley called it, caught the attention of military recruiters desperately seeking young minds capable of unconventional thinking. The British intelligence services in 1943 were drowning in information. Every day, thousands of intercepted messages, photographed documents, and intelligence reports flooded into various departments. The challenge wasn't just decoding enemy communications, it was identifying which communications mattered, which patterns indicated genuine threats, and which enemy agents had successfully embedded themselves within British territory. Margaret's assignment seemed mundane compared to the famous codebreakers working on encrypted messages. She belonged to Document Analysis Section 12, a small team responsible for examining photographed papers, identity documents, travel permits, and correspondence seized from suspected enemy operatives. Her supervisor, Commander Thomas Whitmore, a 48-year-old Navy veteran with limited patience for theoretical approaches, had made his expectations clear during her first week. "You're here to verify document authenticity," Commander Whitmore had explained, his tone clipped and precise. "Check paper quality, ink consistency, stamp impressions, standard forgery detection. Nothing fancy, nothing experimental. We need reliable results, not creative interpretations." But Margaret couldn't help noticing something strange. Over 5 months, her section had processed documents from 47 different suspected agents or sympathizers. Standard procedure required comparing seized documents against known authentic German paperwork to identify forgeries. Margaret performed these comparisons diligently, noting paper weight, typewriter characteristics, official seal patterns. Yet something bothered her, a pattern she couldn't articulate, an instinct that whispered these documents shared a connection beyond their obvious similarities. The breakthrough began with a simple observation during her evening shift on April 16th. Margaret was examining a travel permit supposedly issued in Hamburg, seized from a dock worker in Portsmouth who'd been arrested after suspicious behavior near naval facilities. The document appeared authentic by every measurable standard. Paper quality matched legitimate German administrative stock. Typewriter font corresponded to models used in Hamburg municipal offices. Official stamps bore correct design elements for the 1942 period. But as Margaret held the document under her desk lamp, adjusting her reading angle to reduce eye strain, something peculiar caught her attention. The official stamp, when viewed at an oblique angle under direct light, showed an extremely faint secondary impression, almost invisible, like a ghost image offset by perhaps 2 millimeters from the primary stamp. She initially dismissed this as simple double stamping, a minor bureaucratic error, but the offset pattern nagged at her spatial reasoning abilities. Margaret retrieved her personal pocket mirror, a small rectangular glass her grandmother had given her, and positioned it at an angle beside the document. By directing the lamplight through the mirror onto the paper at various angles, she could enhance the visibility of subtle surface variations. Under this angled, reflected light, the ghost impression became more pronounced. More importantly, she noticed that the secondary impression wasn't just offset, it was geometrically reversed, as though someone had practiced the stamping motion, leaving a faint preliminary mark before applying the final visible stamp. This observation alone meant little, but Margaret's mind worked differently than her colleagues. She began wondering whether other documents in their archive might show similar characteristics. Working through the night, she requested files from 16 other cases, selecting documents that had aroused her vague unease during previous examinations. Using her mirror technique, angling light across each page, she discovered that 11 of these documents displayed similar ghost impressions, all showing the same geometric pattern of faint preliminary marks before the main stamp application. More intriguing was what she noticed about handwriting. Several documents contained handwritten notations, dates, authorization signatures. Under normal examination, these signatures appeared authentic, each supposedly written by different officials in various German cities. But when Margaret used her mirror to examine the pen pressure patterns, the way light reflected differently from areas where fountain pen nibs had pressed paper, she observed something remarkable. The pressure patterns were nearly identical across multiple documents, allegedly written by different people in different locations. Handwriting analysis typically focused on letter formation, spacing, and style. Margaret approached it spatially, examining not what the writing looked like, but how the physical act of writing had deformed the paper surface. Every time someone writes with pressure, particularly with fountain pens common in that era, they create microscopic surface depressions. The pattern of these depressions, Margaret realized, was as distinctive as the handwriting itself, perhaps more so because people could disguise their letter formation, but couldn't easily disguise their pressure rhythm, the unconscious way their hand moved across paper. By the morning of April 17th, Margaret had identified 23 documents from 17 different cases that showed matching pressure patterns and similar ghost stamping characteristics. These documents supposedly came from sources across England, seized from suspects in Portsmouth, Liverpool, Manchester, Dover, and other cities. According to official records, these suspects had no known connection to each other. They'd been arrested at different times for different reasons. Some were dock workers, others shop owners, clerks, or boarding house operators. But Margaret's mirror technique suggested that all their documents had been created by the same hand using the same stamps. She brought her findings to Commander Whitmore on the morning of April 17th. She'd prepared a detailed presentation, carefully organizing the photographed documents, her mirror-enhanced images, showing the pressure patterns and ghost impressions. She'd written a 12-page analysis explaining her methodology and conclusions. Commander Whitmore listened for perhaps 5 minutes before cutting her off, his expression mixing skepticism with barely concealed impatience. "Miss Ainsworth, these techniques are not standard protocol," he stated flatly. "You're seeing patterns because you want to see patterns. Ghost impressions could result from paper manufacturing processes, storage conditions, or simple document handling. Pressure patterns. There's no established science for analyzing pen pressure as an identification method. This is, frankly, a waste of departmental time." Margaret felt her face flush with embarrassment and frustration. "But this isn't about individual impressions, sir," she insisted. "It's about the pattern across multiple cases, the same characteristics appearing in documents supposedly from completely unrelated sources. That can't be coincidence." Commander Whitmore shook his head firmly. "Coincidence is exactly what it is, or confirmation bias. You've convinced yourself there's a connection, so you're finding evidence to support your belief. This is why we have established protocols, Miss Ainsworth, to prevent exactly this kind of speculative analysis." He dismissed her, instructing her to return to standard verification procedures and abandon what he termed her mirror games. Margaret returned to her desk feeling defeated but not convinced. She couldn't dismiss what she'd observed. The patterns were too consistent, too specific. That evening, working alone during a quiet shift, she decided to expand her analysis differently. If these documents truly came from a single source, that source would need access to authentic German paper stock, genuine stamps, and detailed knowledge of administrative procedures. That suggested someone with direct connections to German intelligence services, someone trained in forgery techniques. She cross-referenced the arrest dates and locations of the 17 suspects, whose documents showed matching patterns. Plotted on a map of England, these arrests formed no obvious geographic cluster. But when Margaret added timeline information, noting not where people were arrested but when they'd first appeared in their respective communities, a different pattern emerged. 13 of the 17 suspects had arrived in their current locations between October 1941 and March 1942, a 5-month window. More significantly, all 13 had arrived with seemingly legitimate documentation explaining their presence: transfer papers from other cities, employment records, identity confirmations. Margaret spent the night of April 17th building a new hypothesis. What if these weren't 17 separate cases of individuals with forged documents? What if they were 17 members of a single coordinated network, all supplied with documents from the same central forging operation? If true, this would represent something unprecedented in British counterintelligence experience: a highly organized, centrally coordinated network operating with remarkable discipline and security. On April 18th, Margaret had another realization. If her theory was correct, there should be a handler, someone coordinating activities, supplying documents, maintaining operational security. That handler would likely have access to similar documentation, might even possess extra sets of papers for new network members or replacements. She reviewed the files again, this time looking not at the suspects themselves, but at their known associates and contacts. Standard investigation procedure had already mapped these networks, identifying everyone the suspects regularly contacted. Margaret looked for something different. She looked for common secondary contacts, people who had interacted with multiple suspects, even if the suspects themselves seemed unconnected. The pattern she found was subtle, but striking. 7 of the 17 suspects had at some point visited or received mail from addresses in the Kensington district of London. The addresses were different, but they fell within a 6-block radius. More intriguingly, 3 suspects had received letters from someone using the name Martin Schreiber, purportedly a distant cousin or family friend who gave his address as a boarding house on Cromwell Road in Kensington. Margaret requested surveillance records for that address. The boarding house was operated by a woman named Claudia Hoffmann, a 62-year-old German émigré who'd lived in London since 1938, before the conflict began. She'd been investigated early in the conflict, but cleared after establishing her credentials. She'd married a British citizen in 1939, had no known connections to German intelligence, and had been cooperative with authorities when questioned. Surveillance had been discontinued in 1941, but Margaret noticed something others had missed. Claudia Hoffmann's boarding house had 9 regular tenants according to registration records. One of these tenants, listed as Martin Schreiber, had been residing there since January 1942. Records showed him as a Swiss businessman dealing in textile imports, with proper documentation and clean background checks. Margaret requested the file on Martin Schreiber. His documents looked impeccable: Swiss passport, business registration, correspondence with British textile firms. Everything appeared legitimate. But Margaret noticed that his entry documentation package had been processed through the same Portsmouth immigration office where one of the original 17 suspects had first entered the country. She spent the entire night of April 18th examining photographed copies of Schreiber's documents using her mirror technique. Under angled, reflected light, his identity papers showed the same faint ghost impressions, the same preliminary stamp marks. His handwritten business correspondence displayed the same pressure patterns she'd identified in the other documents. Martin Schreiber's papers hadn't been created by someone in Germany and smuggled to him. They'd been created by the same hand that had forged papers for the 17 suspected network members. This suggested something profound. Martin Schreiber wasn't just a network member, he was likely the forger himself, the person creating documents for the entire operation, possibly the network coordinator. By dawn on April 19th, Margaret had compiled everything into a comprehensive report. She included comparison photographs, detailed pressure pattern analysis, geographic and timeline correlations, and her conclusion that Martin Schreiber represented the key to an entire intelligence network. She knew Commander Whitmore would dismiss her again, so she made a bold decision. She requested an emergency meeting with Section Chief Colonel Robert Davies, bypassing her immediate supervisor entirely. Colonel Davies was known as a demanding but fair officer who valued results over protocol. He agreed to meet with Margaret at 6 o'clock that morning, intrigued by her claim of having identified a major network. Margaret presented her case carefully, focusing not on theory, but on specific observable evidence. She demonstrated her mirror technique, showing how reflected angled light revealed patterns invisible under normal examination. She presented the pressure pattern analysis, explaining how different writers created distinctive microscopic surface deformations. She showed the geographic and temporal correlations, the common connections, the mathematical improbability of these patterns occurring by chance. Colonel Davies listened carefully, examining her evidence, asking pointed questions about methodology and potential alternative explanations. After 40 minutes, he made a decision that would validate Margaret's months of work. "Your analysis is unconventional, Miss Ainsworth," he said finally, "but the pattern correlation is undeniable. The probability of these similarities occurring randomly across 17 separate cases is statistically negligible. I'm authorizing immediate surveillance on Martin Schreiber and expedited investigation of Claudia Hoffmann's boarding house." The surveillance began at noon on April 19th. Counterintelligence teams established observation posts covering all approaches to the Cromwell Road boarding house. Within 6 hours, they observed something remarkable. 3 different individuals, none previously connected to known investigations, visited Schreiber's residence that afternoon. All 3 appeared to conduct legitimate business, staying only briefly. But something about their behavior, quick glances at surroundings, indirect approach routes, suggested trained caution rather than innocent activity. Over the next 48 hours, surveillance teams documented 23 different visitors to Schreiber's quarters. Cross-referencing these individuals against existing intelligence records revealed that 7 were already under some level of suspicion, though none had been directly connected to each other before. The others appeared to be completely unknown to British intelligence, operating below any previous detection threshold. On April 21st, Colonel Davies authorized a coordinated operation. At 4 o'clock in the morning, simultaneous raids were executed on Martin Schreiber's residence and 17 other locations associated with his documented visitors. The operation involved over 200 personnel from military intelligence, police special branch, and counterintelligence services. What they discovered exceeded even Margaret's analysis. Martin Schreiber's rooms contained a complete forging workshop, multiple authentic German administrative stamps for various cities and departments, various types of German official paper stock, specialized inks, and extensive files documenting 43 different individuals operating throughout England. His records included detailed operational notes, contact schedules, and intelligence reports ready for transmission. More significantly, they found evidence that Schreiber had been coordinating activities not just in England, but across a broader network extending to Scotland and Wales. His files indicated that he received regular supplies through a maritime smuggling route involving neutral Swedish vessels, explaining how he maintained access to authentic German materials. Claudia Hoffmann, the boarding house operator, proved to be deeply involved. Her seemingly innocent establishment had served as a central meeting point and safe house. She'd been providing cover for network members, facilitating communications and maintaining operational security. Her background as a long-term London resident had made her above suspicion, the perfect position from which to operate. Over the following week, British counterintelligence arrested 68 individuals connected to the network. Interrogations revealed a sophisticated operation that had been functioning effectively for nearly 2 years. The network had been gathering intelligence on shipping movements, military installations, industrial production, and various strategic matters. They'd been operating with remarkable discipline, maintaining strict compartmentalization, using careful communication protocols, and avoiding the typical mistakes that had exposed other operations. The case made headlines throughout intelligence services. though public announcement was carefully controlled for security reasons. What astonished senior officers wasn't just the network's size and sophistication, it was how it had been uncovered. Traditional counterintelligence methods had failed to detect this network. It had required a 17-year-old analyst with a pocket mirror and unconventional spatial reasoning to identify the pattern that exposed everything. Commander Whitmore, to his credit, acknowledged his error in dismissing Margaret's initial findings. In a private meeting 3 days after the raids, he apologized directly to her. "I was wrong, Miss Ainsworth," he admitted frankly. "I dismissed your methods because they didn't fit established protocols. I've been doing this work for 23 years, and I let experience blind me to new possibilities. Your mirror technique is now being incorporated into standard document analysis procedures across all intelligence departments." The mirror technique itself became a subject of serious study. Experts in document examination, materials science, and forensic analysis investigated Margaret's methods, seeking to understand why angled reflected light revealed patterns that normal examination missed. They discovered that Margaret had accidentally developed a practical application of principles that would later be formalized in forensic science: the use of raking light and reflection analysis to detect surface characteristics invisible under standard illumination. Her pressure pattern analysis proved even more revolutionary. By analyzing the three-dimensional deformation of paper surfaces rather than just two-dimensional appearance of writing, Margaret had identified what would eventually be recognized as a legitimate forensic methodology. Within months, specialized equipment was being developed to measure and compare pressure patterns, techniques that would continue to evolve throughout the remainder of the 20th century. Margaret's success had broader implications for British intelligence operations. Her case demonstrated that even the most sophisticated enemy operations could leave subtle physical signatures that proper analysis might detect. More importantly, it proved the value of encouraging unconventional thinking and providing opportunities for young analysts to pursue unusual methodologies, even when experienced officers remained skeptical. The network's disruption had significant strategic impact. Interrogations of arrested network members provided valuable intelligence about German operational methods, communication protocols, and strategic priorities. Several network members, facing lengthy imprisonment, chose to cooperate with British intelligence, providing information that helped identify additional operations. The maritime smuggling route used to supply Schreiber was traced and shut down, disrupting supply lines for other potential networks. Perhaps most significantly, the case revealed a vulnerability in Allied counterintelligence assumptions. British security services had believed that any large coordinated network would eventually expose itself through communication patterns or operational mistakes. The Schreiber network had nearly proven this assumption wrong by maintaining extraordinary discipline and centralized control. It had been exposed not through its operations, but through the physical evidence of its document preparation, an aspect that previous security thinking had underestimated. For Margaret personally, the case transformed her career trajectory. She was promoted rapidly, given increased responsibilities, and eventually assigned to help develop new document analysis protocols for all Allied intelligence services. Her techniques were shared with American and other Allied counterintelligence organizations, contributing to the detection of several other networks throughout the remainder of the conflict and into the post-war period. Martin Schreiber's identity proved to be completely fabricated. Interrogation revealed him to be Klaus Heinrich, a career intelligence operative who'd been trained specifically in long-term deep cover operations. He'd entered Britain in late 1941, using meticulously prepared documentation, established himself carefully, and had been successfully operating for over a year before Margaret's analysis identified his document signatures. Claudia Hoffman's case proved more complex. Investigation revealed that she'd been coerced into cooperation through threats against family members still living in Germany. This complicated case highlighted the ethical challenges of counterintelligence work. She ultimately received a lighter sentence than other network members, and her cooperation during interrogation provided valuable intelligence. By the time the conflict ended in 1945, Margaret had been involved in analyzing documents from over 300 cases, training dozens of other analysts in her techniques, and contributing to the development of standardized protocols that would be used by intelligence services for decades afterward. She'd risen from a teenage recruit, dismissed as eccentric, to one of the most respected document analysis specialists in British intelligence. After the conflict, Margaret chose not to remain in intelligence work. She returned to Cambridge, completed her studies in mathematics and physics, and eventually became a professor, specializing in geometric analysis and spatial reasoning. She rarely discussed her wartime service, maintaining the secrecy expected of intelligence personnel even decades later. Only after official records were partially declassified in the 1970s did the full extent of her contributions begin to be publicly understood. The mirror technique itself became standard procedure in document examination, though few people ever knew its origin story. Forensic laboratories around the world incorporated raking light analysis and reflection examination into their protocols. The specific methodology Margaret developed remained remarkably effective, so much so that even with advanced modern technology, investigators still use variations of her basic technique when examining questioned documents. The case also influenced how intelligence agencies thought about recruitment and training. Margaret's success had proven that unconventional thinking and fresh perspectives could sometimes see patterns that experienced analysts missed. This led to deliberate efforts to recruit diverse analysts with different educational backgrounds and cognitive approaches. One of the captured network members, during interrogation, provided perhaps the most striking testament to Margaret's achievement. When shown the mirror-enhanced photographs that had helped expose the network, he reportedly shook his head in disbelief and said through a translator, "We thought we were invulnerable. We had perfect discipline, perfect security. We never imagined we could be undone by something so simple, by a girl with a mirror and the ability to see what others missed." Margaret lived until 1998, passing away at the age of 72. In her later years, after classification restrictions eased, she occasionally spoke at conferences about the importance of encouraging young people to pursue unconventional ideas, to trust their observations even when established authority dismissed them, and to remember that sometimes the most powerful tools are the simplest ones applied in new ways. The mirror itself, the small rectangular glass her grandmother had given her, was eventually donated to the Intelligence Services Museum at Bletchley Park, where it remains on display. The simple object sits in a glass case with a small placard explaining how this everyday item, wielded by a 17-year-old with spatial intelligence and stubborn determination, helped dismantle a network that conventional investigation had failed to detect. The techniques Margaret developed continued to evolve long after her initial discoveries. Modern forensic document examination incorporates sophisticated optical equipment, three-dimensional scanning technology, and computer analysis to detect forgeries and identify document relationships. But the fundamental principles she established, that physical documents carry information beyond their obvious content, that the act of creating documents leaves distinctive traces, that careful observation of subtle patterns can reveal hidden connections, remain central to the discipline. The broader lesson of Margaret's story extends beyond intelligence work or forensic science. It speaks to the value of trusting observation over assumption, of being willing to pursue unconventional approaches when conventional methods fail, of recognizing that expertise sometimes blinds us to possibilities that fresh eyes might see clearly. Commander Whitmore's initial dismissal of her findings wasn't malicious or incompetent. It reflected the natural tendency of experienced professionals to trust established procedures over novel suggestions. Margaret's persistence in the face of that dismissal, her decision to continue developing her analysis despite official discouragement, made the difference between a network remaining undetected and its complete exposure. That persistence required confidence in her own observations and willingness to risk professional embarrassment by going around her immediate supervisor. Many people in her position would have accepted the commander's dismissal. Margaret's determination to pursue what she believed she'd discovered reflected a kind of intellectual courage that proved as important as her analytical skills. The story also highlights something often overlooked in historical accounts of intelligence work: the role of accident and luck in major discoveries. Margaret hadn't set out to develop a new forensic technique. She'd simply been adjusting her reading angle to reduce eye strain when she happened to notice the ghost impression under oblique light. Her decision to use her grandmother's mirror was improvised problem-solving, not planned methodology. The breakthrough that exposed an entire network came from a combination of careful observation, unconventional thinking, and fortunate circumstance. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.